You know that feeling when you finally think you've made it? That moment when you see the perfect place and your heart just skips a beat? That was me the day I first set foot on my ranch outside the HOA. I had been searching for months, scrolling through listings, visiting properties that never felt right. And then suddenly there it was. The minute I stepped onto the land, I knew it wasn't just a ranch, it was freedom. Freedom from noise, from endless rules, from neighbors who cared more about perfectly trimmed hedges than letting you live your life. It didn't even feel expensive at the time. I signed the papers, got the keys, and I started dreaming about all the things I would do. I imagined raising a few horses, planting a big garden, building a workshop where I could tinker all day. The whole country life fantasy. I was on top of the world. That feeling of finally having something that was truly mine, it's hard to describe. I drove there the day I closed, just standing on the dirt road, staring at the sunset, imagining my future. I even whispered to myself, "You did it. You're finally free." It felt cinematic, like a scene out of a movie. Little did I know, that dream was about to turn into a nightmare. About a month after moving in, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was some routine HOA notice from the nearby community, maybe welcoming me or giving me information about local events. But no, it was a bill, a big one that claimed I owed $100,000 in back dues. At first, I laughed. I mean, $100,000? For what? I didn't even belong to their HOA. I checked the address, triple-checked the property lines, and everything was correct. Still, the letter looked official and included threats of legal action if I didn't pay. My stomach dropped. I read it over and over, thinking maybe I was missing something. I wasn't. You know that sinking feeling when something feels completely wrong, but your brain refuses to accept it? That was me for the next few days. I felt a mix of anger, confusion, and panic. How could this happen? I followed all the rules. I bought the land legally. I didn't cheat anyone. And now some HOA I never agreed to was claiming I owed 6 figures? I called the company listed on the notice, and a woman answered, polite and very rehearsed. She said something like, "Well, you technically are in our jurisdiction." I wanted to scream. "Technically?" I asked. "I'm outside your HOA, I'm not a member, and there's no contract." But she just kept repeating the same line, calm and robotic. I was pacing my living room, phone in hand, staring out the window at my ranch. It looked peaceful, serene, completely untouched by this chaos. I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. I couldn't believe this was happening. Something that was supposed to be my sanctuary had instantly turned into a battlefield. It wasn't just about money, it felt personal. That ranch represented years of hard work, saving, and dreaming. Every time I thought about losing it, my chest tightened. I couldn't believe that a faceless organization could make me question my life choices and sense of justice. I imagined scenarios where I'd have to sell the ranch, pack up my things, and move back into a cramped apartment somewhere. I imagined neighbors gossiping about what a failure I was. My mind raced, and honestly, I felt powerless. It's a weird mix, pride and fear tangled together. Pride for finally having something I worked hard for. Fear because some random HOA wanted to take it away from me. Friends were supportive, but they couldn't really help. Lawyers were expensive, and deep down, I knew I had to fight this myself. So here I was, standing at the edge of my dream, staring at a letter that could ruin everything. I had two options. Roll over and pay the $100,000 they claimed I owed, which I knew I didn't, or fight like hell. And giving up has never been in my nature. That ranch was my freedom, my future, my hard-earned victory. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me without a fight. Little did I know the battle was just beginning. And what I discovered next would shock me in ways I never imagined, revealing that this wasn't just about me, it was about a system that had been quietly scamming unsuspecting ranch owners for years. After staring at that letter for hours, I realized I couldn't just sit around and hope it would go away. I needed answers. So the next day, I grabbed my laptop, a notebook, and a cup of coffee, and I started digging. I started with the HOA's website, trying to find any mention of my property. At first it seemed normal, lots of rules about landscaping, fences, noise, and of course fees. But as I dug deeper, I noticed something strange. There were pages and pages of back dues lists, some going back years, some with properties that weren't even in the community anymore. And that's when the first red flag went up. I printed out the letter again, highlighted the sections that didn't make sense, and started comparing property maps with the HOA's documents. My ranch was clearly outside their boundaries. I even called a local real estate lawyer, just to be sure I wasn't missing some hidden clause. The lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. Legally, I owed them nothing. But he warned me that fighting it could get messy. He said, "These organizations are tricky. They'll try to scare you with big numbers, but don't let that intimidate you." I spent days combing through documents, researching state laws, and calling other ranch owners in the area. That's when I started hearing stories that made my blood boil. Apparently, this HOA had a history of sending ridiculous back dues notices to people who had never even agreed to join. Some had paid out of fear, some had fought back and won, and a few had even been dragged to court before finally clearing their names. I couldn't believe it. I thought I was just unlucky, but now it was clear this was a pattern, a deliberate strategy to intimidate people and make them pay what they didn't owe. One evening, I sat on the porch of my ranch, the wind brushing through the trees, and I realized I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let this happen to me or anyone else. I decided I was going to document everything, every call, every email, every notice. I even started recording conversations, legally, of course, to make sure I had proof if it ever escalated. I felt a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. Then came the first confrontation. I called the HOA office again, trying to speak to someone who actually had authority. The receptionist put me on hold forever. And when someone finally picked up, they tried the same line. "You technically fall under our jurisdiction." I kept my cool, repeating the facts calmly. "My property is outside their boundaries. I never agreed to join and I have proof." The person on the other line hesitated for a moment, probably realizing I wasn't going to back down, but then they hung up, just like that. I felt both frustrated and oddly satisfied. I knew I had rattled them, even if just a little. I also started reaching out to other neighbors, people who lived just outside the HOA lines. Some were sympathetic, some were scared, and a few shared stories that made my jaw drop. One woman told me she had been threatened with a lien on her property for thousands of dollars, even though she had documents proving she wasn't a member. Another man said he had to hire a lawyer and fight in court for months before. The HOA finally gave up. Every story I heard confirmed that this was a systemic problem, not a misunderstanding. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the emotional toll. Every day I woke up anxious, checking my mailbox before even getting out of bed. I felt like I was under constant surveillance, like a predator was waiting for me to make a mistake. But I also felt a strange kind of empowerment. I had this ranch, this land I loved, and I was fighting for it. Every document I filed, every call I made, every piece of evidence I gathered made me feel stronger. I was turning fear into action. One morning, I got an email from the HOA, short, curt, and full of legal jargon. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss my alleged dues. I knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to intimidate me, make me nervous, maybe even get me to pay just to avoid the hassle. But this time, I didn't panic. I replied firmly, reiterating my position, and requested that all future communication be in writing. That way, I had a paper trail. I knew this fight wasn't going to be quick or easy, but I also knew I wasn't alone. As I walked across my property that evening, the sun setting behind the hills, I realized something important. This ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was a symbol of my perseverance, my freedom, and my refusal to be bullied. And even though the battle was just beginning, I felt a sense of calm. I had a plan. I had evidence. And most importantly, I had conviction. I wasn't going to let a faceless organization take away something I worked so hard to build. In the days that followed, I continued investigating, uncovering even more details about the HOA's practices. They had loopholes, backdated agreements, and even some questionable tactics that were designed to confuse people. But every discovery made me more determined. I started documenting everything meticulously, organizing files, writing down conversations, and preparing for what might come next. I knew the fight ahead would be tough, but I also knew one thing. I wasn't giving up my dream ranch without a fight. I couldn't believe how far this had gone. Every day seemed to bring a new headache, a new surprise, and yet somehow, I kept thinking about that first day I stepped onto the ranch, the way the wind blew through the trees, the smell of fresh earth, The horizon stretching endlessly in front of me. That was mine. That peace, that freedom. And yet it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. After weeks of back-and-forth emails, phone calls that went nowhere, and late nights researching, I realized the HOA wasn't just going to leave me alone. They were aggressive, organized, and relentless, and I had to match them step for step. I decided to take a more direct approach. I drafted a detailed letter outlining my position, including proof that my property was outside the HOA boundaries. I attached maps, survey documents, and even photographs that showed the clear distinction between my land and the HOA territory. I sent it certified mail and waited. Days went by and nothing. No response, not even an acknowledgement. It was infuriating. I started imagining them sitting in some office, ignoring the mail, assuming I'd eventually cave in, but I refused. Then came the next move, the phone call that changed everything. A lawyer from the HOA finally called, and I could tell immediately this was a serious escalation. He was polite but cold, like a shark circling its prey. He recited the same lines I had heard before. Technically, your property is within our jurisdiction. Back dues are owed. Legal action may follow. I tried to stay calm, but anger bubbled up. I have documents proving otherwise, I said. I am outside your boundaries. I have never agreed to join, and I owe nothing. He paused, a long, heavy pause before saying, "We'll see about that." Then he hung up. My hands were shaking. I had faced difficult situations before, but this felt personal, almost malicious. Over the next few days, I noticed something unsettling. I started seeing letters in my mailbox that were more threatening, more intimidating. Liens, demands, and legal threats piled up, all claiming that I owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. I remember holding one of those envelopes, staring at it, thinking, how is this even legal? I felt trapped, cornered, like I was being hunted. But I also felt a growing fire inside me. I couldn't let them bully me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about principle, about standing up against a system that preyed on ordinary people who only wanted to live their lives. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I started reaching out to other property owners in the area, and slowly, a network of people who had faced similar issues emerged. Stories poured in. People who had been threatened. People who had been sued. People who had paid out of fear only to later realize they had been scammed. Every story made my blood boil, but it also gave me strength. I wasn't the only one. We weren't alone. There was power in numbers, in sharing experiences, in realizing this was a pattern, not a mistake. The emotional toll, though, was undeniable. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, replaying the conversations, the letters, the threats. I would stare at the ceiling, wondering how an organization could have so much power over someone's life. Sometimes I would break down, sitting on the porch of my ranch, letting the wind and the silence of the land calm me. That ranch had become more than a property. It was my sanctuary, my anchor, my reminder that I had fought too hard to let fear win. And then came the confrontation I had been dreading. The HOA sent a notice demanding an in-person meeting at their office. They made it sound optional, casual, but I knew it was a trap. A psychological play to intimidate me. I spent hours preparing. I went through every document, every map, every email, making sure I had everything organized. I even rehearsed what I would say. When the day arrived, I drove to their office, nerves on edge but determined. As soon as I walked in, I felt it. The cold, sterile atmosphere, the rows of desks, the organized chaos designed to overwhelm anyone who walked in. The meeting was tense from the start. I presented my documents calmly, explaining the property lines, the legal boundaries, the facts. I watched their faces carefully. Some tried to dismiss my points, some avoided eye contact, and one person even tried a sarcastic comment about how, technically, they had ways to collect dues. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I stayed composed. I knew losing my temper would play right into their hands. I spoke firmly, confidently, and insisted that I owed nothing. I made it clear I was prepared to fight in court if necessary. Hours later, I left the office with no resolution, but something had shifted. I realized they weren't invincible. They had methods and threats. Yes, but facts, evidence, and persistence mattered more than fear. I drove back to the ranch, the sun low on the horizon, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone, I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't going to give up. In the days that followed, I ramped up my efforts. I documented every interaction meticulously, stored copies of every letter, and even started recording video logs of my experience to ensure nothing was lost. I began to plan strategically, consulting lawyers, and considering every legal avenue. Every call, every email, every visit became a small victory, a step toward reclaiming control. But even as I fought, the emotional weight was enormous. I had moments where I questioned myself. Why had I bought this property? Why was I putting myself through this? Nights when I felt exhausted, stressed, and fearful. And yet, when I walked across my ranch, when I felt the earth beneath my feet and saw the sun casting golden light across the hills, I knew I couldn't back down. That ranch was mine, and I would defend it with everything I had. By the time I was halfway through this battle, I started noticing subtle things. Neighbors giving me sympathetic glances, small notes of encouragement left in mailboxes, messages from strangers who had watched my journey online. It reminded me that my fight wasn't just personal. It was part of a larger struggle against systems that take advantage of people. That realization gave me strength. It turned frustration into determination, fear into resilience. And then came the moment I knew would define the next chapter of this story. I discovered evidence that the HOA had intentionally misclassified properties, trying to trap people in a loop of endless dues. They had loopholes, backdated agreements, and tactics that weren't just aggressive. They were manipulative and, in some cases, possibly illegal. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a deliberate, organized attempt to intimidate property owners, and I was standing directly in the path of it. As I sat on the porch that night, staring at the ranch I loved so fiercely, I realized something important. Fear could be a weapon, but it could also be fuel. Every threat, every letter, every sleepless night became fuel to fight harder. I wasn't just protecting land. I was protecting my freedom, my dreams, and my sanity. And I knew deep in my heart that whatever came next, I was ready. After weeks of sleepless nights, endless emails, and confrontations that left my blood boiling, I finally felt like I was approaching the turning point. I had gathered all the evidence, documented every interaction, and built a case so solid that even my lawyer admitted it would be hard for the HOA to refute. But the fight wasn't over yet. In fact, it was about to get even more intense. The day started like any other, with the sun rising over the ranch and the smell of fresh earth filling the air. But I could feel it in my gut. I was about to face the final showdown. I got another letter from the HOA that morning. This one was thick, official, and full of legal jargon. At first, my heart sank. But then I reminded myself of all the work I had done, all the steps I had taken to protect myself. I wasn't going to be intimidated anymore. Not now, not ever. I called my lawyer first thing, and we went over a detailed strategy. Every line in that letter had a counterpoint. Every threat had a legal response, and every possible loophole they might use was accounted for. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the ranch stretching out in front of me, and feeling a mixture of exhaustion and determination. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. This land represented years of dreaming, saving, and finally achieving something that was entirely mine. And I wasn't about to let anyone take it away. Then the calls started. One after another, HOA representatives trying to pressure me, reminding me of consequences and legal repercussions. At first, I felt the familiar surge of panic, but I caught myself, took a deep breath, and responded calmly. I cited the property maps, survey documents, and state laws. I referenced every conversation I had documented, every email I had saved. And each time I spoke, I felt stronger. Their words, once terrifying, now seemed empty against the truth I had in my hands. A few days later, I received an invitation, or more accurately, a summons to attend a formal hearing. It was intimidating. They wanted me to appear in person in front of a panel to discuss my alleged dues. I won't lie, my stomach churned at the thought. But I also knew that this was my moment, to show that I wasn't going to be silenced or bullied. I spent the next few days preparing meticulously, reviewing every document, practicing what I would say, and visualizing every possible scenario. I even rehearsed responses to tricky questions they might throw at me. The day of the hearing arrived, and I drove to the office with my folder of evidence clutched tightly in my hands. The room was cold, sterile, and designed to feel intimidating. But I refused to let it shake me. As soon as I walked in, I could see the faces of the HOA representatives. Some were confident, some cautious, and some seemed annoyed that I had even shown up with a well-prepared defense. I took a deep breath and started presenting my case. I showed the maps, the property lines, the prior communications, and every legal point that confirmed I owed nothing. I could feel my voice shaking at first, but as I spoke, I grew stronger, more confident. Hours passed. Questions were asked. Objections were raised, but I stayed calm, patient and unwavering. I could feel the tension in the room, the way some of them exchanged glances, the way their confident facades wavered when confronted with facts. And then finally, the chairperson spoke. "We have reviewed the evidence," they said, "and it appears that the property in question is indeed outside our jurisdiction. No dues are owed." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, a mix of triumph and exhaustion. I had won. Walking out of that office, the weight that had been pressing on me for weeks finally lifted. I felt lighter, freer, and more connected to the land than ever. My ranch, the place I had fought so hard to protect, was truly mine. The sense of victory was overwhelming, not just because I had won legally, but because I had stood up for myself, refused to be intimidated, and defended something I loved fiercely. The emotional impact of this victory hit me in waves. I remembered the nights I had spent staring at the ceiling, the moments I had questioned myself, the fear that had clawed at me every morning, and now as I walked across my ranch, the sun casting golden light over the hills. I felt an incredible mix of gratitude, relief, and pride. I had faced fear head-on and come out stronger. But the story didn't end there. I knew I had a responsibility to share my experience, to help others who might find themselves in the same situation. I started posting about my journey online, sharing the challenges, the threats, and ultimately, the triumph. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who had faced similar issues, from those who had been intimidated into paying dues they didn't owe, and from others who were just inspired by my determination. I realized that my fight wasn't just personal. It had become a beacon for others, a story of standing up against unfair systems and refusing to be silenced. And that's when it hit me. This ranch wasn't just land. It was freedom. It was proof that persistence, preparation, and courage can overcome intimidation and injustice. Every tree, every blade of grass, every sunset I witnessed on that property reminded me of the struggle I had endured and the victory I had achieved. I started inviting friends over, sharing the ranch with family, and even organizing small community gatherings. It wasn't just a place to live anymore. It had become a symbol of resilience and triumph. As the days went by, I also realized the importance of vigilance. Just because I had won this battle didn't mean similar threats would never arise again. I continued documenting everything, keeping records, and staying informed about local property laws and HOA regulations. Knowledge had been my greatest weapon, and I knew it would continue to be. I felt empowered, not just as a property owner, but as someone who had reclaimed control over my life and refused to be bullied. Now, when I look back at the chaos, the fear, and the sleepless nights, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel pride. Pride in my resilience, pride in my ability to stand up to intimidation, and pride in the life I built on my ranch. I realize that fear is temporary, but courage and persistence leave a lasting mark. That ranch will always be a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when the odds are stacked against you, is always worth it. So here's my message to anyone listening. Don't let intimidation or fear control your life. Stand firm, document everything, and fight for what's right. And if you've ever felt powerless, remember this story. A piece of land, a dream, and determination were enough to turn a terrifying nightmare into a story of victory. That ranch isn't just a property. It's a testament to perseverance, justice, and the power of never giving up. And finally, if you've enjoyed this journey, if you've felt the tension, the fear, and the triumph with me, do me a favor, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and hit subscribe. Join the community. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Your support means the world, and together, we can share stories that inspire, empower, and remind us all that standing up for what's right is always worth it.